Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar on carbon removal from concept to action. My name is Avatar Simpson. I'm a senior sustainability consultant with Agendi, and my colleague Capucine and I are going to kick off the webinar with a quick overview of the carbon removal landscape. I want to quickly note that after the panel discussion, we'll be having a Q&A section, so please feel free to submit your questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. And the webinar will also be recorded, which we'll likely be posting on our Agendi YouTube after the webinar ends. So to begin with the overview, we're going to quickly run through what CDR, or carbon removal, is and introduce it quickly, as well as discuss how it can be incorporated into a company's net zero strategy. And then Capucine will discuss some of the frameworks and quality criteria that can be used to assess the efficacy of carbon removal credits, as well as some of the main challenges that the CDR industry faces today. So to begin, we want to differentiate between carbon removal credits and carbon avoidance. Carbon avoidance credits are from projects that prevent additional carbon from entering the atmosphere. These can include projects such as renewable energy projects that replace fossil fuels, as well as deforestation prevention. Removal credits, on the other hand, directly remove or capture carbon from the atmosphere, and they can be anything from reforestation to biochar to direct air capture. So it's a mix of both nature-based solutions and technological-based solutions. The main difference here is that avoidance credits result in a net gain of emissions in the atmosphere because it only avoids additional carbon from being emitted whereas carbon removal credits remove carbon from the atmosphere, so they result in a net zero gain of emissions within the atmosphere. The GHG protocol also has two main aspects that they use to define carbon removal credits. The first is the actual removal of the carbon from the atmosphere through what are called sinks. So these sinks include the direct air capture machine, plants and trees through reforestation efforts, and they are what absorb the carbon. But another main component is the storage of the carbon after it's sequestered, and this occurs in what's known as pools. The main three types of pools are land-based pools, such as within soil, product-based pools, such as wood products, and then geologic pools, where it's stored deep underground. I also want to note that there are ocean-based carbon pools, but these are not yet covered by the GHG protocol, so we won't be discussing these in much detail for the webinar today. I also want to highlight here that when we say CDR and carbon removal credits, this only refers to carbon removal that goes beyond natural cycles or business as usual, because the additionality and the new removals caused by the human interactions and human activities, that is one of the main quality criteria part of the main quality criteria frameworks that Capucine will be discussing later. And now getting into how carbon removals can be incorporated into a company's net zero strategy, we first want to differentiate between a carbon neutral strategy and a net zero strategy. And there's two main differences here. The first is that a net zero strategy through the Science Based Target Initiative's net zero framework requires a company to reduce their emissions internally on top of any external removal through carbon removal credits. This is different from carbon neutral claims because they do not require a company to reduce their emissions internally. And the second main difference is that the SBTi's net zero framework specifies that only carbon removal credits will count towards a net zero claim, whereas for carbon neutral, both avoidance and removal credits can be acceptable. The SBTi also only allows up to 10% of your emissions in your target year to be covered by removals, which means 90% of your emissions internally have to be reduced in order to achieve any net zero target, separate from the 10% covered by carbon removal credits. The SBTi also highly encourages companies to go beyond just procuring removals in their target year and extending that to invest in climate mitigation projects beyond their value chain long before their target year occurs. And they mainly encourage this because there's a current large gap in the global ambitions to reduce emissions over time and the actual emissions that have been reduced to date. And by investing in climate mitigation beyond the company's value chain, they can help close this gap. And by doing so, they can have a bigger impact. Instead of just covering the 10% in their target year, they can build up over time and end up having a larger portion of that dispersed throughout their whole target coverage. The SBTi also encourages this because they want to promote companies investing in projects that have additional social and natural co-benefits on top of their carbon avoidance or removal possibilities. And some companies have already done this by switching away from carbon neutral claims and focusing more on climate contribution claims. So focusing on those benefits instead of the actual quantity of carbon credits that are procured. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Capucine to discuss the quality frameworks and some of the challenges faced today.
Indeed, let's have a look at the frameworks and guidances that are currently paving the way. So we'll zoom into two of them. While they're still in development, it gives a great idea what policymakers are currently considering to ensure credible certification, but also credible accounting of removals. The first one is the carbon removal certification framework, which was submitted by the EU Commission. While it's still a proposal, it gives a really good idea what quality criteria are for removals. The current proposal covers removals from nature-based solutions, technology-based solutions, and product-based solutions. With this proposal, they hope to achieve three objectives. The first one is to set out quality criteria. So you must have heard maybe about the acronym quality that they use. The quality acronym stands for 4 criteria. The first one is quantification. Of course, it's key to be able to measure accurately the removal. Additionality is the second criteria. The removal activities need to go beyond what is required by law, beyond what is business as usual, and they need to take place thanks to the incentive effect of the certification. The long-term storage, of course, the idea is that the carbon needs to stay in the ground, and so they need to demonstrate the long-term storage of it and mitigate any risk of release. The last criteria is sustainability. The EU has actually presented some sustainability objectives, and the idea is that the carbon removal should preserve or contribute to these objectives, such as climate adaptation, biodiversity, or circular economy, etc. The second objective is to develop a certification methodology. And the third objective is to increase public trust, which is really important right now, as you might have heard of the different press releases around carbon offsets lately. So clearly big efforts to be done there. And so we're looking forward to have a bit more confidence thanks to that framework. And so the EU proposal hopes to ensure that by adding transparency and robustness in the certification process. So while the proposal is going in the right direction, there has been quite a few reactions, and so that's why it's still not a final proposal. Amongst the reactions, we've heard things like the lack of definition. For instance, what does long-term mean? The inclusion of product-based removals, the equal treatment of technology-based solutions and nature-based solutions, or even the lack of clarity around the use of these certificates. So we'll keep a close eye on it and see how things evolve. As we mentioned in one of the 4 criteria is quantification, and so that brings us to the second, let's say, standard, which is actually the guidance of the land sector and removals from the GG protocol. And so indeed, this one is really focusing on the accounting and reporting of removals, amongst other things, because it does touch upon other aspects. It has been released in 2022 as well, but still a draft, and we hope to see a final version in 2024. So here the goal of this guidance is really to push companies to better account and better report removals, and they want for companies to respect 2 principles, which is the principle of permanence and conservativeness. For that to happen, they have developed 5 requirements. The first one is ongoing monitoring. So it's really important to monitor the storage continuously of the carbon, to demonstrate that the carbon is stored, or to detect any losses. The second is traceability. So it's really important to keep an eye on the end-to-end process, really understand where the removal is coming from, which sink and which pool. The third requirement is primary data. Even though it can be a challenge to have good quality data to calculate the removal, the GG protocol really encourages to use empirical data. The fourth one touches upon, of course, the conservativeness aspect. which is the uncertainty. So they require companies to provide a quantitative uncertainty estimate for removals. And the last one is reversals. So we know, of course, that a release of carbon can happen with some removal methods. And so the GHG protocol requires companies to account and report any carbon stock loss. So as we said, it's still a work in progress because it's a complex topic. Complex topics also means challenges. And so the last part of our introduction will zoom into some of these challenges. Perfect. Thank you. So let's have a look at the left-hand side of the slide first. We've listed a few challenges. Of course, it's a non-exhaustive list. I'm sure our panelists will have things to add on there. But the first one is the economic challenge. So of course, removals have a cost. Sometimes it's considered too high, too low compared to regulated carbon markets. But still, the fact that it has a cost is a challenge for companies. The accounting challenge is the second challenge identified. We mentioned it. It's hard to quantify removals, and there's always a degree of uncertainty. Some experts have argued because of that to move away from the ton-for-ton equivalents and rather look at activity-based finance, especially for nature-based solutions. The additionality challenge, so here, of course, it's the key part of the quality criteria, the fact that the removal project wouldn't have occurred without the carbon credit purchase. If we move on the top right, communication challenge, here we refer to the fact that lately there's been a lot of risks, reputational risks for companies that communicate around offsets. And so that's why, as Avatar already mentioned, we encourage companies to rather focus on climate contribution claims rather than carbon neutrality claims, and focus on the positive impact of removals rather than on the tons of CO2 stored. The permanence challenge, of course, that's something that was also touched upon in the GHG protocol guidance. The idea that removal methods have different storage time scales, and so it's really important to have an ongoing monitoring of the carbon stored. The last challenge is a trade-off challenge. We know some of the methodologies can increase the competition for land, renewable energy, or biomass. On the other hand, we also see co-benefits with some of the methodologies for food security or biodiversity, and so clearly something to keep in mind there as well. All in these challenges show one thing, is that we still are missing maybe real robust policy frameworks to tackle them, and so that there is really a need for them to come into place to be able to accelerate research and deployment of removals. And that would conclude our introduction. So hopefully that gives you a bit more background on removals, and I think we're ready to start the panel discussion to go a bit deeper into the topic.
Yeah, thanks, Capucine. I'm going to quickly introduce our three panelists as well as our moderator. Our first panelist is Yona Kunis from Puro.earth. He's the director of key accounts. Puro.earth is the world's leading crediting platform for engineered carbon removal. They currently have 41 certified suppliers across 5 verification methodologies and have issued more than 2,000 removal credits to date. Our next panelist is Jason Grillo. He's the director of partnerships and operations at Airminers. Airminers is a carbon removal accelerator, educational platform, and innovator community with more than 2,000 like-minded individuals. They operate programs including Boot Up, which is an educational entry point for those new to carbon removal and interested in learning more, as well as Launchpad, an accelerator for early-stage carbon removal startups. Our third and final panelist is Duncan Karyauki, the product lead at Octavia Carbon. Octavia Carbon is the Global South's first direct air capture company, which designs, builds, and will deploy its patented technology to filter carbon from the atmosphere. Octavia has been able to improve the efficiency of direct air capture processes through renewable energy being co-located with geological storage and having a high potential for large-scale infrastructure deployments. And our panel will be moderated by Arno Brohe, the CEO of Agendi. Agendi is a sustainability consulting firm specialized in carbon accounting, emissions reduction strategies that include carbon removal procurement and ESG reporting. And before I hand it off to Arno, just want to quickly reiterate that you can put any questions you have into Zoom's Q&A feature. And with that, I'll hand it off to Arno to begin the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Avatar and Capucine, for the introduction. Really excited to have this panel with you all. I think I will probably start with the later slide that Capucine presented. So I'd like to focus on the challenges. And we are fortunate to have different perspectives. You know, we have Puro representing more like the standard and methodology development side. We have Airminers. They have a really good understanding both of the buyer side, but also like all the startup ecosystem and the investors, which are of course a critical part. We are at a very early stage for many of those technologies. And then we have Duncan representing one project developer. So I'd like maybe to ask all of you, maybe starting with the project developer, maybe Duncan, if you could start with what do you see as your main challenge? And it can be, of course, one challenge that we have not identified. The list is probably not exhaustive, but I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Thank you so much, Arnaud, and thank you to the Agendi team for organizing this panel. In terms of challenges, I guess my perspective is a bit different, given that we are a Kenyan company in East Africa. And so the challenges that we face here are unique. They are different from the challenges that, say, somebody developing a project in Europe or in North America faces. But in many ways, they are also similar. And I would say that one of the biggest challenges for, at least for carbon removal in Africa, has been basically, I would say there are three main challenges. That's funding, there's a narrative problem, and also there is a problem around regulatory uncertainty in some jurisdictions. And it's an ongoing conversation because we are big proponents of this. We believe that Africa will be a huge player in the carbon removal space, and much of the global south as well. And so these are challenges we must overcome if we're going to scale it in Africa. So if we are to delve into the problems a bit more, carbon removal is primarily, it's either hardware, engineered solutions like DAG, but it's also very capital intensive, even in other nature-based solutions. And so being able to get funding at all across the entire stage of any project development, whether it's at early stage, whether it's at scale-up stage, or whether it's at massive stage, is really important if we're going to scale this industry. There's also a bit of a narrative problem. There have been concerns around, especially for the global south, looking at it or a perspective that it's cleaning up the rest of the world's problem, and with countries in Africa having contributed at least to climate change. But the way we can counter that is that this is a real opportunity to have really green growth in Africa by getting a lot of export revenue to projects in Africa. And lastly, on the policies, in some places there is some regulatory uncertainty. Carbon removal is now becoming a core focus of many governments. My own government, Kenya, in Kenya, just recently passed a Climate Change Act, or an Amendment Act, and there is an increasing focus even from the president, who says that he wants carbon credits to be Kenya's leading export. And so there's an awakening right now, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done, both by project developers like us, ecosystem builders, and also by the governments.
Thank you very much, Duncan. That's very comprehensive, and also important to understand that there might be specificities in the global south that we do not always think about from the Western world. I also think it's always important to remember that while today, I would say almost like the entirety of the market is voluntary, if we get it right, it could become integrated in mandatory markets. Like there could be links to the EU ETS, there could be links to also like discussion at the COP and ways to basically make sure that some of the funding goes to least developed countries that were, of course, the least responsible for climate, but that are paying some of the biggest impact today. So I think it's always important to remember that if we do it right on a voluntary basis, it could become mandatory and really help scale up things. With that, I'd like to ask the same question to Jason and bring the perspective of Airminers and your community in terms of what challenges you see in the short term, and how you think we are going to address them.
Sure. Thanks, Arnaud, and thanks to Agendi for the invitation to be here. So I would say that it's kind of a good news and bad news situation in the overall landscape of carbon removal. Yes, we have companies who are really starting to poke through with seed funding, Series A funding, advanced market commitments, and they're getting there, and that's fantastic. And there's maybe, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 companies who are starting to get to that scale. That said, on top of that, we've had maybe 120 companies graduate from our Launchpad program. And these are all small 2 and 3 and 4 person startups, right? And they're all looking for basically funding and investment and commercial contracts for their credits. So getting to the, by the way, note that Duncan and the Octavia team are a esteemed graduate of our program. So thank you, Duncan, for putting the time in with us. So full disclosure, that's moving right along though. The landscape of carbon removal today is very much the landscape of startups. We've had, like I said, 120 teams graduate our Launchpad program in 2.5 years, and we've had over 900 applications to that program. And again, these are all very small companies struggling to, for the most part, struggling to get to where they need to go to get their first demonstration plant done, get their first pilot facility done. And there's kind of a double valley of death or chasm going on here. One is there's a need for investment dollars to come in for, in particular, early stage investors. 2, there are a need for carbon removal credit buyers to come in and provide that first commercial contract with an early stage company. That's particularly why we have that's exactly why we have 2 demo days associated with each of our Launchpad batches. One for investors, another one for carbon removal credit buyers, so that teams who are able to provide credits within, say, 12, 18, 24 months can come to demo day, present their pitch, and then hear from buyer, and then connect with buyers after that. In addition to connecting with early stage investors in a separate demo day event that we have at a different time. So again, twofold issue. One is getting carbon removal credits down. Second, getting early stage investment into these companies. I'm happy to say that things are moving in the right direction. That said, we see that I love the slide you put up earlier, distinguishing avoidance offsets, which are, again, nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with cook stoves per se. That's and renewable energy projects and avoidance. Like, we all want trees to continue to grow. I get that. That said, removals are a fundamentally different type of credit, and getting traction among, in particular, buyers to understand what differentiates a removal credit from a traditional avoidance credit. That's a challenge that a lot of startups are up against, and that we see in our Launchpad teams and with other marketplaces and others who are trying to differentiate removal credits from the way that quote unquote offset markets have been characterized to date.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. And of course, like, it's clear that for startups, what you need is get your first clients, and the only way to get clients is to get something like a commodity, something that you can sell. In renewable energy, we call that PPA, like the power purchase agreement. Yeah. ERPA, that's how we call like emission reduction when we were in the avoidance market. But we need the same for removals as well. And so that's a nice transition, of course, to Yona. Puro is, I think, with Vera, probably the only standard, the only body that issue that release methodologies and that help project developers get to the point where they have CDRs that they can trade on a platform, on a registry. So I think it would be interesting to hear your perspective, especially when we look at your colleagues at Vera, who of course were also and are still involved in the avoidance of sets and have their own issues there. So I'm curious to see what would be the main challenges for you in the space today.
Yeah, thanks, Arno and Agendi team. So indeed, as mentioned, I think when Puro.earth was developed, so we did not want to come to the market sort of challenging the already existing infrastructure that Vera, Gold Standard, and other registries had built over the past years. But with that being said, we did want to offer a avenue for startups and other companies wanting to start doing carbon removal to actually access the market and the wider audience of carbon credit buyers. So indeed, it's very important to note that we need to make sure that the market is accessible to a variety of different buyers. We need to make sure that we have a standard. We have scientific methodologies. We have an independent registry, all under Puro. So we provide that sort of similar avenue as Vera has done very successfully for avoidance-based and nature-based solutions in the past. So I think when it comes to some of the challenges, as already briefly touched on, I think it's really what are the fundamental differences. And I think one of our founding ideas is the fact that when we realized that many of the existing methodologies in the avoidance space were based on counterfactual baselines, we expected that once the market evolves, there's going to be more criticism, there's going to be maybe more backlash, which we've now seen materialize in the last couple of years. So it's been very important that we differentiate ourselves and we differentiate carbon removals from that fact. Also, ex-ante credits have been proven to be a little bit difficult in the past, although very much needed in the nature-based solution space. But that's one thing that we're doing differently compared to some of the existing registries. So all of our methodologies and our standard only issues ex-post credits. So in on vocabulary, they're called the CO2 removal certificates, or CORCs. And those are sort of some of the things how we're trying to tackle the challenges so that the buyers can have trust in placing these early stage offtake agreements, pre-purchases, and getting involved in the carbon removal market.
Yeah. Talking of trust, of course, like an important thing when it comes to trust is the verification itself. Especially, if you only do expose and if it's not based on counterfactual. So could you be like a bit more specific and explain what do you focus on during the verification process, and what makes you think that your standard is more robust to other standards? Because today there are different standards developing methodologies for similar types of projects. So that's a question that comes very often, both from our corporate clients that want to buy removal credits, but also from project developers, startups that are looking into getting their project registered, like which standard should they go for, and why should they go with Puro.earth, for instance?
Yeah, definitely. So Jason already mentioned a little bit that certifying durable carbon removal is fundamentally different compared to avoidance-based projects such as improved forest management. So with that being said, we focus on measuring as much as possible instead of modeling. So I think that's one key thing that we do different in how we look at the world different compared to some of the existing standards and methodologies. Now, it's also important to note that durable carbon removals don't happen normally by themselves. So they need human activity, and the quantification with our standards is based on how much carbon is actually being stored, for how long, and how much was emitted while doing this process. And only at that point we can guarantee true carbon removal. So what we look at is the entire life cycle analysis from a carbon removal project developer, the activity, and we only quantify indeed the negative emissions. So we also focus, of course, as mentioned, on a storage so that there is a permanence or durability criteria. So as of right now, under the Puro standard, we have two categories of corks, which one is a cork 100 and the other one is a cork 1000, which notes the durability or permanence associated with that methodology.
So 100 years or 1000 years, that's
correct.
Yeah, perfect. I'd like to ask a slightly similar question to Duncan at Octavia. So why did you decide to get verified? And maybe can you tell us a little bit more about what it implies? Because I think looking at some of our audience, that there are other startups that are probably like a little bit more early stage than you are, guys, and thinking about going through verification. So if you could share your experience of getting through the process with Puro.earth.
Yeah, definitely. So the basic answer is that we decided to get certified basically to build trust and to build trust with our buyers who believe in us relatively early on. Especially in the removal space, there is a tendency to pre-purchase credits that will be delivered in the future. And so just being able to make sure that we've de-risked everything for our buyers. We made very early on, we made a choice to get certified and basically build the project with the highest level of confidence. So the way we've done that is we've actually partnered with Puro, and Yona was actually right from the very start being really helpful. And basically the question is always, what do you focus on as a startup? There are always 1,000 fires burning every day, and you have to choose the ones that you want to put out. So just being able to have a company or an entity like Puro to basically help hold our hand through the certification process so that we can focus on building the tech and delivering credits, and at the same time building trust with our buyers. That made it a very clear choice why we want to get certified with them. And the process, at least in our experience, has been that we've basically gone through a listing on Puro's registry. We are also thinking through getting some pre-validation against the methodology, because we'll be issuing credits against the geologically stored carbon methodology that Puro has developed. And then from there, we will have a full-scale validation against that methodology. And then finally, once the units are on the ground and CO2 is being put in the ground, we will have an actual on-site validation and verification of those credits. So it's a process. And it started long before the project was even fully developed, because we are still designing it and developing it. But it's allowed us to really build trust with our buyers.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to go to Jason now. And of course, when we think about removal projects, especially technology-based removers, we often think about how do we capture CO2 and how the energy it requires. But one of the most important aspects ultimately is going to be, how do we store carbon? Like, how do we ensure like the permanence, and how do we make sure that we don't get leakages in 50 years or 500 or 1,000 years? So my question to you, Jason, would be, what are the main storage methods today, and how do they differ from one another?
Yeah, so a lot of different ways of storing carbon atoms, CO2 molecules. We start with Duncan's company or other direct air capture companies. There's a couple of ways of doing that. Once the CO2 is removed from the air, you can either put it into a saline aquifer in what's called supercritical form, where it does not react with the cavern that it's put into. That means you've got a CO2 molecule, and you've got a CO2 molecule. Great. And there's been scientific data suggesting that's a very stable way of storing CO2 just in an underground form. Great. Another way is through fusing it with minerals. So in particular, olivine rock, which is a company called 4401 out of Oman is doing. And then there's also basalt rock, which is precisely what Duncan's company is doing in East Africa and other companies around the world. Iceland in particular is blessed with basalt rock formations, as well as Kenya. But in Iceland, the company called Carbfix is doing that in accompanying with Climeworks. So those are ways to do it for direct air capture. For other methods, the biochar itself, many of the projects that we see on Puro and elsewhere, you mentioned earlier, having different ways of storing that. The biochar method is the char itself represents a carbon store, because it's effectively kind of charcoal that is carbon itself. There are ways of, we're not going to talk about ocean too much, but ocean alkalinity enhancement. The bicarbonates formed are very long duration storage represented in the bicarbonates that just don't react with the atmosphere. So the carbonate produced in that process is a form of CO2 storage. Same with enhanced rock weathering as well. Also building materials. Puro has a methodology specifically for cement building materials, and where the CO2 can be combined with either cement or directly into concrete, and that as long as the building is standing, it represents a store of carbon.
Thank you. So we see that the number of possibilities seems, it's endless. Like there are a lot of interesting technologies that can be developed, and this is why we're seeing like hundreds of startups investing in them. One criticism that we often hear when it comes to carbon removal is that, of course, many, especially when we think direct air capture and some of the most advanced technologies, it requires huge amount of energy. So, some people might say, why should we be using like a lot of, and of course, this energy, like all the projects are based on 100% renewable energy, but you could also argue that until we are using 100% renewable energy for everything, maybe we should prioritize, switching from fossil fuel to renewable energy before using such a large amount of renewable energy to capture CO2 from the atmosphere. And because of that huge cost, that has also an impact on the scalability. We see that it's really hard to basically scale up and remove millions of metric tons of CO2. Most of the projects today are removing, like for the biggest one, we're talking in the thousand, but for smaller one, it's hundreds of tons of CO2 per year. So it's still like very, very small scale. So my question to you, Duncan, is why should we invest in direct air capture given those hurdles, and how do you think you can scale up successfully? And what do you say to people who say that this energy should maybe be used for other applications?
Yes, that's an excellent question. I'd say it is true. The costs of technologies like dark are high, and the energy consumption is also high. But there are ways of mitigating against that. The technology innovations that everyone, I can guarantee you that everyone in the dark space is innovating. And one thing to keep in mind is that the technology is very new. It's quite nascent, and it has a long technological journey to go through. And so it's still important to invest in it now so that it can undergo that technological journey. And we've been here before as the world. We think 30 years ago, solar was mad expensive. And right now it's the cheapest form of renewable energy in most places. And so there are lessons that we can borrow from other industries or other forms of technology, think solar, think wind, which have really scaled down the cost curve. And people are thinking about how to reduce the cost as an ecosystem. But also, it's important to keep in mind that the costs of investing in this technology today, whether you're a buyer or whether you're an investor or even as a government, are nothing compared to the costs if we do nothing today. And basically, we don't want to be in a position where in 30 years, we are running around to try and scale the technology because we didn't do it today. And that's something that I constantly tell people. And even in our own technological journey, we've seen continuous improvements in the modules that we build, and we'll continue doing that. And those are engineering challenges. And I believe that the best minds in the world are working on them.
Yeah. One question I have, like sub-question I would say is, when we look at avoidance of sets and some of the most successful projects, or maybe we can think about clean cook stoves, I think one of the reasons why they were successful and probably gold standard in particular, when it comes to a standard promoting them, is because there were also like other side benefits. So there were other positive externalities. If we think about cook stove, it was of course air pollution and health benefits. But how do you see some of the potential positive externalities that direct air capture can provide, and therefore I think that would be helpful probably to get a wider acceptance and support for those type of technologies.
Yes, definitely. And that's something all our buyers care about. They want that the credits they're buying to have an impact beyond the climate benefit that they're paying for. And I can speak for Kenya and many other regions, especially in Eastern Africa. One thing, especially in our region, is that direct air capture can essentially be the key to unlocking greener industrialization. We have a very unique dynamic in Kenya where we have very vast resources in renewable energy, but have tapped basically nothing. It's estimated that we have 55 gigawatts of high quality wind, solar, hydro, and geothermal, and we've only been able to install closer to 3 gigawatts. And the reason why that is because we are a developing nation, and so we don't have industries that demand that energy, and so there is no incentive for financiers to either build these projects or for even project developers, energy project developers to build them. So what that means is that the cost of energy generally, even for ordinary Kenyans like myself, is high. So we need basically to build an industry in Kenya, or to industrialize Kenya. We just need someone to step in and basically take on that excess demand, excess supply of energy. And so that's what we are doing with that. We hope that, or we will be taking the energy. It is energy intensive, but given where we are in Kenya with a 92% grid, renewable grid, and with excess supply of renewable energy, we can essentially take that, improve the technology and drive down these energy costs. But what that is doing, at least for the country, is that it's creating bankable demand for energy. And so that will increase more energy projects coming online and drive down the cost of energy, which will then allow other people, say other high energy industries like steel, your steel, for example, to come in and basically industrialize. So we think about things like green steel, green cement, which will require a lot of cheap energy. They'll only come in once those costs of energy come down. And so we are the first mover, or at least we like to see ourselves as that. And we hope that that will just create a catalytic effect for the rest of the industry to basically industrialize. And that's how we see ourselves growing into being a rich country without increased emissions.
I really like that, because, like, of course, it's not like a small household which is going to drive down the cost of solar or other forms of renewable energy. So if you can bring projects at scale and put infrastructure in place, then of course you will have the trickle-down effect to households and families in Kenya that would get access to cheaper renewable energy from solar. So that, which of course will also be useful as you are transitioning your mobility. Like we can think of motorbikes or cars that are also transitioning fast to EVs, also in Eastern Africa. So very interesting to see that perspective and understand why it's important to put those big infrastructure in place first for everyone to benefit. I'd like to, maybe, because we've been discussing a lot on direct air capture, and frankly, if we look at volumes today, especially volumes that have been certified on Puro.earth, it's really like a minority of it. So I'd like to go back to and Puro.earth and ask what methodologies have you developed so far when it comes to certifying removal projects, and what do you offer? And also, what is the reason, why did you start with those technologies and methodologies in particular?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we do have 5 accepted methodologies under the Puro standard as of today, which are, of course, biochar, the enhanced rock weathering, terrestrial storage of biomass, carbonated materials, and then geologically stored carbon, which includes bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, as well as direct air capture with storage. And our aim has been to develop methodologies for the carbon dioxide removal pathways that are ready to be deployed today. In result of that focus, we wrote the world's first biochar methodology. Now, many others are following the lead, as well as then the enhanced rock weathering methodology. Under geologically stored carbon, we've offered now a pathway from an ICRA endorsed standard and registry for actors such as Octavia Carbon to register their first direct air capture tons with us. I'm not gonna spoil it, but we'll see what methodologies we have in mind for 2024. Of course, we are following very closely where the industry is headed. We want to be the pioneer and the leader in writing methodologies, providing this pathway to market for all the IPCC addressed CDR verticals at the moment. So that's sort of our focus, where we want to be, where we want to go, and where our head is at.
Perfect. And what role do you see for policies and government intervention in the space, and also like other potential partners? I'm thinking of course, the Science Based Target Initiative that, you know, spin off from like the different organization that set it up, so it became a new entity of itself. And we know that the SBTI is really driving a lot of the current demand for carbon removals because of their, you know, today, as Avatar explained, we can only use removal units when it comes to achieving long-term net zero targets. What roles do you see for both government and some of those powerful NGOs in our space?
Yeah, so I think governments getting involved can only build trust and legitimacy to the work that we're doing now in the private and voluntary sector, if you will. And that is essential in, you know, starting to rack up more demand, getting more actors and players involved. Now to other sort of standards in the area and regulators, I think the Integrity Council for the VCM, ICVCM, their core carbon principles, will hopefully set a good quality bar for any methodologies. So we're very much following them and looking forward to those applications. Then I believe that SBTI has done an excellent job in bringing carbon dioxide removal on everyone's table and to everyone's attention. Although we're hoping that they will revise their net zero standard and introduce the concept of neutralization milestones before the net zero target year. Right now, it's a little bit ambiguous what the SBTI expects from their net zero aligned companies in terms of whether to start procuring carbon removal now, then hold and retire at the net zero year. But the reality is that if that's the approach, we might not have, and we will not have the available supply. But we do need companies to start acting now, and I think that needs to be incentivized by, many of the actors such as SBTI, ICVSM, and so forth in the market.
Yeah. One difficulty I see when we discuss with our clients, and again, they're mostly like very large corporation with and they set science-based targets, it's like a huge variety in terms of pricing. So if we look at nature-based removers, you can source them sometimes at less than $20. Typically, I would say it's in the $20 to $30 range. If we look at more like technology-based, we have biochar starting maybe at 120, but it can go up to 200. And then if we look at direct capture, it's typically more, and sometimes much more than $500-600 per metric ton. So of course, for corporate buyers, it's difficult and to basically find the right mix. And I think one question that we get all the time is, how do you see, then Yona, I'd like to ask you the question, how do you see prices evolving both for technological and nature-based removals?
Thanks for that. Pricing is always tricky, and maybe if Duncan's prepared, he could answer on sort of their expected pricing for their corks and down the line how the cost curve will evolve or is expected to evolve. But I believe that in order for companies to truly be incentivized to first reduce their emissions, I think both nature-based and durable CDR removal prices and credit prices need to remain high. And when it comes to nature-based solutions, they need to, get even more expensive. It's still such an early market, or no, as you mentioned, biochar is one of the methodologies that is currently producing. There are a lot of actors, a lot of projects currently issuing biochar corks, but we haven't really seen that for any of the other methodologies. There are only a handful of projects issuing under the carbonated building materials as an example, and geological storage is still waiting to be fully operational, where Climeworks is one of the only ones currently being able to do that. So we'll see where the prices go and how they will evolve. But I think, once again, sort of repeating myself in the fact that unless companies start now getting active in the carbon removal market, start developing the relationships with the project developers, start locking in long-term contracts, I'm not sure if there will be availability for them. And especially when it comes to then the pricing down the line, it may very well be even more difficult for them to find good prices in the long run. Where we know right now, looking at biochar as an example, that the best prices are locked in through long-term contracts instead of waiting for the supply to be in the spot market, where the demand is very high and supply is low.
since you mentioned biochar and we have only like 10 minutes left, so it's time to enter the Q&A. So we get one question on biochar from Matt Richardson, asking what is done with the final biochar. So and of course it's important to make sure that it's a product that is useful for the local community. So can you let us know? And maybe Jason, I don't know if you represent also like biochar projects, so you can probably answer.
Well, we actually just had a biochar event at Airminers 2 days ago about how to use it outside of soil amendments.
Okay.
So
I'll let you
it's
answer
something
that
that's literally top of mind for me. Yeah, I mean, there's companies who can put it into asphalt, people can put it into building materials. There are ways of using it for wastewater projects. There is one company that's considering using it, using the some of the processed gases as a heat source for, co-locating with electricity generation, just using the heat source to generate steam at the at an existing electricity generator. So there's a lot of different ways of utilizing the biochar. Yes, it's most commonly known today as a soil amendment, and there are multiple different ways of using it that are just in their infancy right now.
Perfect. Another interesting question, and that one probably for you as well, Jason. So most of the technologies we discussed so far were about capturing carbon, CO2, but we know that there are other greenhouse gases, HFCs, for instance, they have a very long lifespan. Are there like projects that are looking into capturing methane or other greenhouse gases, not just CO2?
Yeah, we have seen more interest in the methane space. Obviously methane is a very different greenhouse gas with a much different residency profile in the atmosphere and a different greenhouse gas different greenhouse gas warming potential for it. So we have seen more places who are interested in methane capture, methane destruction, methane removal in our Airminers community. Nothing available commercially really yet. The crediting for that has really yet to be worked out from what I can see. So stay tuned is the best I can say.
Perfect. I'd like to ask one question as well, and it's probably, I think all of you could answer this, but so we have the framework by the European Commission. There is a lot. If we look at the startup environment, I would say there are probably more projects starting up in the US. What do you see any like activities to regulate and define carbon removers in the US, and what difference do you see in terms of like the type of incentives that are available through the European Green Deal versus the IRA here in the US? I don't know, Jason, if you want to
Jason,
start
maybe?
or...
Sure. I mean, I would say the IRA is a great starting place in the United States. Focus very much on direct air capture, would say. $135 a ton if you utilize the CO2, and $180 a ton if you just outright store it in the ground again. There are numerous other policies moving forward for other methods of carbon removal. The Department of Energy has really taken a leadership position in talking about how they would approach R&D funding for early stage carbon removal projects across all different methods. I know that the DOE in the United States is extremely interested in all of the above strategy, in addition to direct air capture, which is probably the most has probably gotten the most attention to date so far. As far as the European Union, again, I will defer to the European on the panel. But we're looking forward to the CRCF as a potential of unlocking future carbon removal credits as well. It's a little bit different because the EU has an ETS. Whereas in the United States we do carrots rather than sticks. That's just the way things seem to operate in the United States. We'll see how that works otherwise. But Yona, please.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Indeed, there are some countries have taken an active role on exploring this space. little clumsy trials so far, such as what Sweden has done with their double auction for the BECCS landscape. But yeah, I think it's essential, and I very much do applaud the United States for introducing the framework that they've done through the IRA. But remains to be seen. A lot of happening in the space right now. Just last week, one of our founders, Marianne, head of our standard, was in Brussels consulting the European Union. So I think a lot of exciting stuff happening.
Thank you. I'm going to try to wrap up in 2 minutes, but so we received like another question I did not cover yet, and I'm going to try to answer it because it's not really related to carbon removal directly, but it's basically the carbon balance is unfortunately probably less good than what we thought. So the question was, how is this going to affect company science-based targets? Like if we realize that actually we are closer to the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold, and how does that change net zero strategies and the market for carbon capture? And I would say, yes, it has an influence, like we need to act faster. I think for me, the hope comes really from the progress that we see in renewable energy and the scaling up of solar. It's a prime example of that. When we look at electrification of fleet in China, we see also like really positive results, things that the International Energy Agency was not forecasting 3-4 years ago. So things can go much faster than what we think they do actually. And Tesla, for instance, could be an example there as well. So my hope is that we see that happening in the carbon removal space. We know that, of course, we are talking about startup environments, so many companies are going to fail. I think it's going to be important to have the right checks and balance. We also have, almost 20 years of experience from the voluntary carbon market with avoidance offsets. We know what went wrong. For those of you who read the New Yorker article, that was quite painful a few weeks ago, and you can read the Vera press release on this. I think it's important to make sure that the money is going where it makes a change. Accountability will be critical. That's also something that we see from, I think, younger generation. People want to see more transparency, and everyone needs to be accountable for doing what they said they would do. And that's my hope for, the removal nascent carbon market, is that people are really investing, being transparent. There will be failures, like every new technology, there will be failure, but we will progress from there. We know that we have a limited time to act, and we know that not only we need to reduce carbon emission, but we also need to remove CO2. Otherwise, we will never stabilize our climate. So my hope is that both solutions can work hand in hand. And so I will conclude with Duncan's remark, which I found fascinating, on what's happening in Kenya and trying to build that renewable energy infrastructure first, having direct air capture as one of the applications, but then using those progress in other sectors and benefiting everyone, both households and corporations. So with that, I think it's now time to wrap up. I think all of our guests are available on LinkedIn, so you can reach out to us if you have more questions that you were not able to ask. And I'm really looking forward to continue the conversation with you on carbon removal and their role in net zero strategies. Thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to Avatar and Capucine for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you too. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you,
Many
Duncan.
thanks.
Bye-bye.